A great tsunami is about to blow off over 40 million Americans. We are speaking of a great danger that is slowly looming ahead, and even in some states it's already happening. The rental market apocalypse is fast, but swiftly making many Americans shed tears as rentals in the US today get more costly. People are now forced to make sacrifices to keep up with higher prices or face the risk of losing their homes. What is causing the high rent prices? How does this affect Americans? That's what we're going to expose today. So, we urge you to stay till the end. Shortages of rental units and steep prices that have increased in nearly 2 decades are not only fueling an affordability crisis, but also hold a major contributor to several of the major problems that the country is facing in 2023. January alone, this year, a combination of elevated rented prices and the effect of rising interest rates on home costs have made the housing market unaffordable than at the peak of the runoff in 2005. Right now, many Americans are at a greater risk of facing an eviction tsunami that has already started its waves and now is getting bigger with time. According to the latest statistics that were released by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, show that the weekly earnings for both men and women in the middle class were standing at around $1,085 per week as of January 15th, just before taxes. That should be around $4,340 of income per month, which means that the middle class households bringing in that amount would pay more than 40% of their income on rent. You can try to imagine the extent of damage that would pose to many Americans, since many of the working class have families to feed, children to take to school, and responsibilities. On the same, official housing agencies say that anyone spending more than 30% of their income on rent is considered cost-burdened. As we have mentioned earlier, these workers may struggle to afford some of the basic necessities, such as food, medical attention, and transportation. This could even look worse to that low-income worker who will now have to spend about 55% of his or her income just to pay for a one-bedroom rental house currently listed on the market, according to estimates from the National Housing Coalition. New research reported that for the first time in more than 2 decades, every state now has low and middle-income renters who are nearing financial bankruptcy as a result of low rent availability. Rising mortgage rates cause many households to be priced out from home buying, would-be buyers to remain renters. Also, the demand for housing has dropped significantly as a result of the true freight sky high, as the disparity between rent growth and income growth keeps on widening. The National Housing Coalition highlights that people need to earn $24.90 per hour so that they can afford a rental income without spending more than 30% of their income, which is considered a general guideline for a healthy personal budget. While this might be wished in the lives of many Americans, it is so saddening that almost 1/3 of the American workforce earns less than £15 per hour. And this puts these workers in a horrifying position of barely having enough income to cover rent and other basic necessities required in their lives. On average, according to St. Louis Fayette, low-income families owned about 21 cents per dollar of middle-class families' wealth. These substantial gaps remain largely unchanged despite fluctuations from 1989 to 2022. If you can quite remember very well, there used to be a time when a single full-time income could financially provide for families, but nowadays you can see families working harder than ever and still need at least 2 or more incomes to make the financial needs meet in. Zillow data also revealed that back in the year 2022, there was no metro area, no state or county, where a person earning the federal or prevailing state or local minimum wage for a 40-hour work week could afford a 2-bedroom rental home. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, but some states, cities, and countries have established higher minimum wages. Still, there isn't a single US county where a full-time minimum wage worker can afford a modest 2-bedroom rental home. In the US, if you are making, let's say, around $15 per hour, that means you'll have to work for around 130 hours a week to cover the rent on a 2-bedroom rental home, now estimated to cost $1,940. San Diego alone has the second highest local minimum wage in the county at $16.30 per hour, just behind San Francisco at $16.32 per hour. It would take the income of more than 3 people earning a minimum wage to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. You should probably be sweating by seeing these figures. Shocked? That should not stress you, but this is what ordinary Americans go through in their daily lives. What do you earn in a month? Are they laughable figures? Raise a thumbs up if we are both at this level. What can I say? Let's just work harder. Overall, 11 cities in Zillow's analysis require 3 or more full-time minimum wage workers to afford the typical one-bedroom rental. Otherwise, a report by the National Economic Council recently issued the renters a Bill of Rights to promote fairness for American living in rental housing. This document calls for safe, quality, accessible and affordable housing, clear and fair leases, education, enforcement and enhancement of rental rights, the right to organize eviction, prevention, diversion and relief. Over 44% of the US population live in rental housing, states the plan. Even though federal laws such as the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and Fair Credit Reporting Act offer renters certain focus protections, there is no comprehensive set of federal laws protecting renters. Instead, America's rental market is defined by a patchwork of state and local laws and legal processes that renters and rental housing providers must navigate. Despite its righteous intentions, the newly released principles lacked the authority to require implementation. The agency also has plans to move towards requiring certain rental property owners or landlords to provide at least 30 days' notice if they plan to terminate the beliefs of a tenant due to non-payment of rent. Evictions usually appear to be a clear-cut issue where people don't pay rent as agreed upon in their lease and are removed from their property. The reality is much more complex. Unlawful evictions and landlords use eviction filings to scare tenants. Inflations and skyrocketing rent prices have pushed many renters deeper into a financial pit, and according to estimates, around 15% of tenants were behind on rent last month, which is a persistently high number. Sophia Wooden, a research analyst at JCSH's, together with her team found evidence of rampant abusive eviction practices by 4 corporate landlords. And just to mention them, Invitation Homes, Pretium, Ventron and the Siegel Group. One of their illegal acts was not adhering to the eviction moratorium rules of the federal rental assistance programs during the pandemic. The 4 companies had filed a total of 14,744 eviction actions between March 15, 2020 and July 29, 2021. Ironically, at the same time, these companies displayed evidence of financial stability. Siegel had experienced almost no revenue decline. Invitation Homes reported profits. Pretium invested in significant expansions, and both Ventron and Siegel each received more than $2 million in forgiven Paycheck Protection Program funds, as the report suggests. Now, the question is, why were they so inhumane to the tenants? Is it because of their greed for money? You can imagine how much industries and companies don't care about the high costs of living you might be facing. It's either you dance to their tune or suffer. Things are not even better for renters who are looking to move to somewhere else, considering that new leases are now costing them twice as much as the renewals. From reports, new leases are an additional $300 or more per month compared to the $160 per month for renewing an existing lease. The costly rent hikes could actually make renters to be forced to be closer to their workstations or schools because it's too expensive to relocate, or they could get trapped in inadequate apartments, explained George Radio, the company's senior economist and manager of economic research. Hal Martin, a policy economist for the Program on Economic Inclusion at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, analyzed eviction data before and after the pandemic. And one of the most notable results from the analysis was a link between the rise in evictions and the rise in rent prices. In cities, for example, there was a 1% rent increase over the previous 3 months, and there was also a 2% increase in eviction rates. Notably, evictions are getting higher in places where there is higher rent growth. This could mean that if you have a tenant struggling to pay rent, the payoff to evict increases. Then you can raise the rent for the next tenant. This has left many renters with no opportunity but to scramble for affordable housing remains that are in short supply. While illegal evictions certainly make the housing insecurity and homelessness crisis worse, the real blame goes to the low supply of affordable housing, poor wage growth, and a persistent lack of federal and state assistance to help both landlords and low-income tenants. For the past 40-plus years, US workers have faced stagnant wages and loss of buying power. Yet the cost of rent has steadily climbed during that time, with a sharp increase of 14% to 20% over the past 2 years alone. Over the past 2 years alone. The question here is, where are we heading as a country? This question remains unanswered until that day when the impacts of the current situation will be felt in a few years to come. It is very saddening that the government is giving a less ear to this humanitarian crisis that really deserves a great amount of attention and action. Wise ones once said, try to avoid a problem, and then you will realize you've created a bigger problem for yourself. What we only know is that it's only a matter of time before things get flaming hot in the end. This brings us to the end of our video today. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. If you loved watching this video, don't forget to send us those likes. We thank you for watching, and goodbye.